for what reasons, why would my colleagues on the other side of the aisle want foreigners to vote in local elections in Washington, D.C.? What's the purpose? So let's just pose that question of why, and I ask the American public to ask your representative where they stand on this issue, because it's a bipartisan issue, with over two-thirds of this body having voted for it last year.
The gentleman just asked our constituents to ask us what we think about this issue, but I think the better thing would be for the gentleman to ask his constituents what they care about. And I promise you, this issue will not be in the top 3 nor 10 of the things that they want us to focus on. And at the same time, they're pushing a bill to take away health care from 15 million Americans. Give me a damn break. D.C. believes in universal adult suffrage, that all adult D.C. residents, regardless of their immigration status, are subject to D.C. laws, taxation, and must register for selective service. D.C. believes they deserve a say in the local, again, in the local laws that govern them and how their local taxes are spent. Congress should not decide which residents are fit to govern on local D.C. matters. And I promise the gentleman, if he spoke with his own constituents, they don't give a damn.
I rise in support of H.R. 884, which prohibits individuals who are not citizens of the United States from voting in elections in the District of Columbia. On November 21st, 2022, the D.C. government enacted the Local Resident Voting Rights Amendment Act, permitting non-citizen residents to vote in D.C. local elections. This includes illegal immigrants and even foreign diplomats whose interests may be opposed to the interests of Americans. This radical change to Washington, D.C.'s election laws upset lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. For instance, Washington, D.C. Mayor Bowser withheld her signature on the act, something she has done only a handful of times. In last Congress, when an identical bill was brought to the floor, 262 members voted in favor, including 52 of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. Unfortunately, the Senate refused to take up this bipartisan, common sense bill to maintain election integrity in our nation's capital. The right to vote is a defining privilege of American citizenship. Diluting that right by extending it to non-citizens, whether here legally or illegally, undermines the voice of Washington, D.C. residents. Article 1 of the Constitution grants Congress exclusive jurisdiction over the nation's capital, and the House Oversight Committee is charged with ensuring responsible governance in the district, including its election laws. I urge my colleagues to support Representative August Pfluger's bill to restore common sense protections and ensure that only United States citizens have the right to vote in local D.C. elections. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves, and the gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you. I yield myself as much time as I consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
I strongly oppose H.R. 884, which would repeal a law duly enacted by the District of Columbia, because D.C. should be free to govern its own local matters. Republicans claim that Congress has a constitutional duty to legislate on local D.C. matters, but this is historically and legally incorrect. Republicans legislate on local D.C. matters only when they think they can score political points, such as by demonizing immigrants. Where is this passion and work on affordable housing for D.C. residents? Where is this impassioned work on ending gun violence for D.C. residents? They only bring it up to the floor when they think they can score political points, taking away the democratic rights of people here in D.C. and home rule. The framers expected Congress to establish a local government for D.C., and Congress has established various forms of local government for D.C. since 1802. The Supreme Court has held that Congress may delegate to D.C. legislative authority over local D.C. matters. In 1973, Congress passed the D.C. Home Rule Act, which gave D.C. an elected chief executive and an elected legislature, the mayor and the D.C. City Council. The purpose of the Home Rule Act is to, quote, grant the inhabitants of the District of Columbia powers of local self-government, and, quote, to relieve Congress of the burden of legislating upon essentially local D.C. matters, end quote. H.R. 884 contravenes the purpose of the Home Rule Act. D.C.'s Local Residents Voting Amendment Act of 2022 allows D.C. residents who are not yet U.S. citizens to vote only in local elections. Only in local elections, namely for mayor, members of the city council, the state board of education, attorney general, advisory neighborhood commissioner, and ballot measures. The D.C. law does not allow non-citizens to vote in federal elections, which is a crime under federal law. Regardless of your views on the merits of non-citizen voting for local elections, we have to acknowledge that D.C. is not the first, nor are they the only jurisdiction in our country to allow this. At various points throughout throughout American history, Congress in 40 states have allowed non-citizens to vote in local, state, territorial elections, including the home state of the sponsor of this bill. Congress did not prohibit non-citizens from voting in federal elections until 1996. And today, about 20 municipalities allow non-citizens to vote in local elections. I also want to address very specific concerns that we're hearing from our Republican colleagues. Number one, they're concerned that foreign diplomats might vote in local D.C. elections. We believe, number one, that that's highly unlikely, both because they have to renounce their right to vote in their home country and because D.C. has no authority over federal matters and has only limited local self-government. In D.C., the penalty for voter fraud includes imprisonment for up to 5 years. To be eligible to vote in D.C., a person must maintain their residency in D.C. for at least 30 days before the election and cannot claim voting residence or the right to vote in any state, territory, or country. In a letter to Congress, the D.C. Board of Elections made it clear that to vote in a D.C. local election, a foreign diplomat would have to, quote, effectively renounce their right to vote in their country of origin, end quote. The board noted that a foreign diplomat would have to, quote, swear under penalty of law through the D.C. registration application that the person is not claiming voting residence in another country, end quote. The board also noted that an embassy address cannot be used to register to vote, since it is considered a commercial or business address, and a foreign passport cannot be used to register to vote since it does not contain a residential address in D.C. While Republicans are concerned about foreign diplomats voting in local elections, I wonder if they're aware that the United States, that currently in this country, United States citizens who are registered under the Foreign Agents Registration Act are currently allowed to vote in elections at all levels of government in the United States, including federal elections. That's right. Registered foreign agents who are currently U.S. citizens can vote anywhere in the United States. Republicans are also concerned that undocumented immigrants might vote in local D.C. elections. That's highly unlikely because the D.C. voter roll is public record, and undocumented immigrants likely would not want to identify themselves, including their address. In closing, the House of Representatives is considering the wrong D.C. voting rights bill here today. Republicans claim that voting is a core right or the privilege of American citizenship. And not only is that historically incorrect, but I described earlier, it's also hypercritical. Republicans have fought tooth and nail to defeat legislation that would give the American citizens who reside in D.C. voting representation in the House and the Senate. We, of course, continue to push for D.C. statehood, and I urge the House to reject H.R. 884 and instead to pass H.R. 51. Thank you. I yield back.
I rise to ask the question, why are the Democrats so obsessed with allowing non-citizens to vote in our election? Why do they go so out of their way to dilute the voices of American citizens, the very American citizens who elected them to represent them? It is incredibly frustrating to hear that they continue to double down, triple down on giving rights to people who are not citizens of this country at taxpayer American citizen expense. The lead debater on the other side of the aisle said that it's not just this Washington, D.C. that is looking to allow non-citizens to vote in our elections. 20 municipalities, and guess what? They're all Democrat-run. Now, in New York City, we had the same problem. where the New York City Council passed legislation to allow non-citizens to vote in municipal elections. We had to sue to stop it, and we successfully did. But it took not just one round in court, not just 2 rounds in court, 3 rounds in court, where the City Council and the Mayor of New York used taxpayer money to continue to fight this each and every round, despite being voted down in the New York State Supreme Court, in the New York State Court of Appeals, Appellate Court, and lastly, in the New York Court of Appeals, which, by the way, all Democrat appointees on that panel of judges, and we still won because it is illegal. It is not constitutional for non-citizens to vote in our elections. And so just like we fought this in New York City and we prevailed, we will do the same here in Washington, D.C., and make sure that they stop allowing and they don't allow non-citizens to vote in their municipal elections, because we are exercising our constitutional responsibility to protect our elections. So I urge my colleagues to continue to be strong and vote in support of this, because we know that it passed overwhelmingly with bipartisan support last year. 52 Democrats sided with Republicans. But those who continue to push for non-citizens to vote in our elections, to dilute citizenship and dilute the voice of citizens in our elections, should be ashamed of themselves, and they should think about who actually elected them to represent their interests here today and why they continue to push the contrary. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. Gentleman from Kentucky reserves, and the gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you. I yield as much time as I might consume. I think it's interesting.
The gentleman is recognized.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I think it's interesting because the gentlelady who just spoke said something. She said this is about preserving our elections, quote, our elections. This is not about our elections. It's not about my election. It's not about her election being from New York. It's about the elections, the local elections of residents of D.C. Not hers, not mine, theirs. Their local election. And I think it's interesting because I don't know what happened. My Republican colleagues always like to talk about limited federal government. My Republican colleagues like to always talk about giving or local governance, how important that is, and yet they want to rip it away from the people in this city. My question is, how many doors have they knocked in D.C.? Have you knocked a single door? Have you spoken with a single resident, a person who lives here, about what they care about? No. You're using this chamber, you're using these bills to score national political points on local issues. The other thing the gentlelady said, is this about protecting the sanity of citizen voting. And like every other issue, Republicans want our people to believe that in order to protect us, we have to take something away from somebody else. That's how we protect the sanity of voting for citizens. We have to take something away from D.C. that they voted for. When right in front of us, if you want to protect the sanctity of citizen voting in D.C., then we know what we have to do. D.C. statehood. We have to ensure that citizens in D.C. are able to have a fully voting representative in the United States Congress, have full representation in this country. That's what we do to protect the sanctity of citizen voting in Washington, D.C. Not encroach on decisions that the people here have made locally. So I don't want to hear about our elections. Local D.C. elections are not my elections. They're not your elections unless you live here. The local D.C. elections are about the residents of this area. Thank you. I yield back, or I reserve.
The gentleman reserved. Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gill.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to Democrats trying to give voting rights to illegal aliens. Mr. Speaker, once again, Democrats are taking the 20% side on another 80-20 issue. The American people do not want illegal aliens voting. They shouldn't be here to begin with. They have no claim on our resources, and they certainly should not be influencing our political system in any respect. Mr. Speaker, every single one of them needs to be deported, and thankfully we have a president who is actually doing that. Mr. Speaker, for so long, Democrats have called conservatives conspiracy theorists. They've slandered us for saying that the Democrat playbook, which they themselves have articulated, is to open up our borders to ultimately provide amnesty, a path to citizenship, and voting rights to illegal aliens. And Mr. Speaker, they are doing that right now. That's exactly what they're doing, and they're fighting for it. Allowing illegal aliens to vote is not only grotesquely unjust, but it waters down the meaning of citizenship for American citizens who are here. Mr. Speaker, our government should represent our people, American citizens. Illegal aliens have no right to vote. They shouldn't be voting, and they need to be deported. With that said, I yield back. Thank you.
I think I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
You're recognized.
Well, once again, my Republican colleagues want to deflect on this issue, focus in on undocumented immigrants. Undocumented immigrants are unlikely to vote in local D.C. elections. Again, why? Because the D.C. voter roll is public record. Undocumented immigrants are not going to want to identify themselves, including their address, where they live. Non-citizen voting, again, this is consistent. A lot of jurisdictions across the entire country. We talked about 20 municipalities. Do this to allow universal adult suffrage, the ability for people to take part in local elections. The other thing, real quick, that one of my Republican colleagues brought up is the purpose of this bill is, quote, we want to stop the diluting the voices of American citizens. Diluting the voices of American citizens. What's really diluting the voices of American citizens are voter suppression laws, like we see in the South, like we see in Florida, where I'm from. Poll taxes, voter roll purges, voter intimidation. That is what's diluting the voices of American citizens. I haven't heard a single Republican in this debate talk about ensuring that citizens that live in D.C. can have full representation in Congress. Where's that? I bring it up again. Every issue, Republicans want to talk about protecting us by taking away stuff from other people and never want to talk about giving citizens what we deserve. And the citizens of D.C. deserve to have full representation in the United States Congress. I reserve.